It's 8 o'clock. Why don't we get started? I'm Dr. Arlen Meyers. I'm with the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs and work with MI10. Anthony, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm a practicing pediatric cardiologist trying to create a robust interface between clinical medicine and artificial intelligence.
Right. So this conversation is going to, and it's going to be a conversation just to lay a couple ground rules. If you have some questions or comments or insights or whatever, raise your hand or just put it in the chat or just, unmute yourself and ask the question. And this conversation is going to be about venture studios. So I'm pleased to introduce our guest, Eric Malamud, who works with THINKHAT. And just in the spirit of transparency, I'm an advisor to THINKHAT. So Eric, do you want to introduce yourself and just basically tell folks about your journey and how you got involved in all of this? Because I think they'd be interested in your background and maybe they're interested in doing the same thing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Arlen and Anthony and the whole MI10 team for inviting me on. I'm going to have to figure out how to get as cool of an office space as Arlen has there. I'm going to have to work up to it. So yeah, a little bit about me. Kind of was always on the journey to go on to medical school. Before that, made a pit stop working with the innovation arm of a large healthcare system. That opened my eyes to a lot of things. First of all, how broken our healthcare system is, but also more optimistically, how much technology like different digital health tools and AI interventions at that point could really scale impact and move the needle on patient outcomes, patient satisfaction, provider satisfaction, and different areas. So one of the best things I got to work on during that time was actually building out patient deterioration algorithm, working closely with Epic and Microsoft Azure, where we were able to decrease codes in the ICU by 44%. So that was kind of a big aha moment for me of, well, this is really where I see my career moving towards. So I went on to do an MD, MBA. I was always kind of the black sheep that didn't want to follow the traditional linear path that medicine has set up. Always trying to be involved in different innovative projects and different tools throughout my research at that time. And then basically made a hard decision, but I think the right decision for me personally, to rather than going on a residency, do a PhD in computer science and really focus more on AI implementation science, which is a new and evolving field. So that was really exciting experience. During that role, I was asked to lead and develop AI and digital health strategy for an academic medical center. I also had a short stint during that time with the Software as a Medical Device group at the FDA. Opened my eyes a bit to how we are regulating these tools and what the future could look like. Definitely a lot of question marks there, but things are coming together slowly but surely. And now I lead the healthcare practice for, as Arlen mentioned, a venture studio called THINKHAT. Arlen, I don't want to jump the gun here. Do you want me to introduce THINKHAT, or is that a future question?
Well, that's going to be a future question. But the first question is just venture studios in general. Can you explain the venture studio model and how it's different from traditional venture capital, incubators, accelerators, tech transfer offices, et cetera? I mean, what is a venture studio and how is it different?
Yeah. So there's different flavors within venture studios as well, which kind of adds to the complexity, but I can speak to our approach specifically at THINKHAT. So we are really invested in building from the ground up, from an idea through supporting, what we call full stack. And full stack typically has a more of an engineering connotation, but we've tried to carry that through both the development of the concept from the earliest, when it's on a napkin. So we have about 100 and growing engineers, front end, back end, LLM engineers, data scientists, all of that to cover the development of the company in the more traditional sense. But then moving past that, we also support the go-to-market strategy with a robust marketing team, with PR teams, with design teams, with clinicians and scientists to support the validation and ongoing development of that product, as well as an implementation and customer success team, and we've scaled a national sales distributor network as well. So the idea here is to both provide the capital to build companies on a much more rapid timeline where the companies can really rely on that infrastructure that we've set up. Right now it's about 120 and growing employees to get through the riskiest stages of growth for a startup. They can lean on the venture studio for pretty much, as I mentioned, any function that you would need to get through about a Series B, when then that management team would spin out from the venture studio and scale beyond that. So that's the core idea of what we're building. We do have 3 kind of structured models for how we spin out and develop companies. So one we call our founder model, which is all kind of internal validation. We have 128-point evaluation, kind of a proprietary methodology that we've come up with to evaluate whether an idea is worth pursuing on a bunch of different axes and measurements. And then we build that company out and kind of retain ownership and serve as the management team from end to end. That's been kind of the core of what we've developed for now. And we do have 12 portfolio companies. I should have mentioned that we're across healthcare more traditionally and life sciences as well, in terms of the companies we're building. The second model is our co-founder model, where somebody either sees some of the IP and the tech stack we've built or has an incredible idea, comes to us and says, hey, I really want to utilize the infrastructure that you've set up. Can we make something happen? Again, we would go through our traditional evaluation process that I've mentioned. And if we feel the market opportunity is strong enough, we would move towards development of that idea. And we do currently have a portfolio company that we're co-developing with a co-founder and actually a university more broadly right now. And then the last model, what we're really excited about that we've rolled out kind of in probably about the last 3-4 months, is our innovation partnership program. So we're going to health systems, academic medical centers, other venture arms, universities more broadly, and saying, to your point, Arlen, incubators, accelerators, tech transfer offices are good at certain things, and they maybe don't excel in actually pushing out and scaling products to market. And that's where we feel like a lot of our strength lies. We've built a robust network of health systems that rely on us and trust us. And we can also do implementations in the right way and have an understanding of how you go beyond just a pilot. So in that program, there's a few ways we engage, whether that be with opening up our portfolio of existing companies, saying, hey, do you want to pilot any of these and see the value? And maybe we can make some customizations to them to fit within the workflows that you have going now. Or we can even explore the idea of co-developing a product with that institution that we have an innovation partnership with. So that's our model.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, is it fair to say that a venture studio is about building, funding, launching, and scaling a company versus some other platforms that sort of don't do the whole enchilada?
Yeah. I don't want to, get into this battle of measuring what we do versus others, but I do think our approach is very holistic in how we support, as you said, the ideation, what we call ideation, incubation, and illumination of companies. And we feel like we've built that ecosystem in the infrastructure to take companies through those stages. Yeah.
So if you're someone listening on this call and you're thinking of creating a company, what would be the next step, or how would you suggest someone decide where do they go? I mean, do they join Y Combinator? Do they get involved with their, if they're at an academic place, then probably they're going to wind up in tech transfer. Maybe they do some sort of collaboration or some other kind of venture studio. So what's the next step? What should someone do if they want to engage with, or at least learn more about whether they want to engage with a venture studio? More specifically, ThinkHAT.
Yeah, well, obviously the landscape of academic research in a lot of ways is changing now, and I also think that might be a space and a niche that venture studios can come in, and we're excited about engaging with as many academic medical centers and universities more broadly as we can at this time, because again, I think a lot of the stresses of being an early stage founder, coming from, I think you've said this phrase a lot, right, Arlen? You don't know what you don't know. You're going to run into a lot of issues that are hard to foresee. I think we can also, before you go down a long and arduous journey of building out an idea, kind of, the reality is, and I think it's a good and a bad thing, everybody's kind of building in this space of AI and healthcare right now. So how do you weed out what has substance, what is and isn't sustainable? And we can help provide that idea for you. Really open to collaborative approaches. I think there's so much to fix and that we need to work on, and the opportunity is so incredible with AI and healthcare that we're not closing the doors to saying really to anyone. So we're happy to hear all partnership type opportunities. And again, I think we know what we're good at. We can build, we can provide capital, and we can scale and go to market, right? And then so we really want to partner with organizations that deeply understand the clinical side, the research aspects, and have a deep understanding of the existing workflows in that clinic. How can we disrupt them? How can we automate them? How can we improve them? And so if you feel that layer on top brings the value that you need, definitely more than happy to talk.
When you engage with a company, what's the typical equity structure for the startup coming out of the venture studio? So what's in it for me if I have an idea or a company and I engage with you? Best case, the company is launched and it grows, then how does that work for me? What do I get out of this?
Yeah. So I'll say that the co-founder model is a bit newer to us. We've taken it on a case-by-case basis. We do not, we don't have an exact kind of set equity number at this point. We figure out and again, we try to be very fair in this process. And because we have a portfolio of 12 companies right now, but we intend to spin out new portfolios every 24 to 36 months. So we're willing to give up a good piece of equity in each company. It's not that we're really out to put the founder and that team in a bad position. So I'll give just a concrete example of a structure that we have now. We've given up about 25% equity in a company where we've asked a co-founder to step in as chief medical officer. That does not, he's not full-time with us. He's retained his role with the university. He provides advisory services, I would say kind of on a weekly basis, about 5 to 10 hours. And then we work together closely on co-development, and then he kind of helps lay the path for scaling the product from a business development standpoint. So that's just one example that we have as of now.
So if you're interested in doing that, then you're going to have to figure out, like if you have a company and you try to do this all by yourself or with other people, I mean, you can't do it all by yourself, but not using a venture studio. You put together a startup team and you go through the rigmarole, raising the money, all that. Unless you bootstrap it, you're not going to wind up owning 100% of the company anyway, because every time you go out and get money, you're going to get diluted. and who knows what you'll wind up with at the end of the day, let alone whether it's going to be successful. So if people are saying to themselves, well, wait a minute, if I do this myself, I own 100%. If I give it to you, maybe I get 25. Well, that's really not the way it works. So we can't, I mean, everybody's different. The model's different, but it is a factor that you have to consider in terms of, a certain percentage of something is better than zero of nothing. So 100% of nothing. So it really just kind of depends. Correct?
Yeah. No, I want to reiterate that, right, 25% is not a hard and fast rule, and it depends on a lot of what is the opportunity, what's the market size, how many customers do we envision happening once we develop the product, things like that. But no, I think it's a really challenging environment right now to get capital, and it's been that way for a few years, and it's hopefully improving in the next few years here. But you never know with the market uncertainty that's going on. So we can kind of put in place so that you can just run and go as fast as possible, because that's the name of the game in a lot of sense here. So again, we would support through a Series B, where typically the company would have somewhere in the range of 5 to 10 million in ARR that you're showing, and you're really ready to hit the kind of hockey stick exponential growth where maybe you wouldn't need to lean on a venture studio as much. But those really risky days of getting capital, building a proof of concept, getting your first customers, we kind of have all of those pieces in place to help you overcome those challenges.
Right. And just for those that may not be familiar with the term, ARR is annual recurrent revenue. So it's basically how much money are you making in a given period of time, in this case, a year, a month, a week, whatever. Good. So Anthony, let me just ask you, in your travels, maybe you can enlighten us on what are you seeing in terms of how these AI companies, startup, scale-up companies, are getting to market. What are you seeing? I mean, obviously, some try and they fail, but I'm not talking about OpenAI with multi-gazillion-dollar funding.
Yeah.
But of the earlier stage or scale-up companies, how are they traversing the landscape?
One thing I'm seeing is that on the AI side, the data scientists have a zeal for a startup, but they have a really tough time getting into any health system or getting a clinician deeply involved with them. And what happens is they have this escalating commitment, Arlen, where they think they're on the right track, and they're not really, I think, in parallel paying a lot of attention to the clinical relevance and impact. And what I see is they kind of, and I think Eric can probably agree to this, they get further and further from real world application, and they get deeply more and more involved with their own tool. And it's like falling in love with the wrong person. And they try to come back. By the time they reach a health system or find a clinician, they're way off target. And then they have to kind of come back to a sweet spot with the clinicians. And I find that mistake or poor judgment over and over again. And they may find, some a minimal amount of funding, and then they kind of run out of their financial support, and then they go out of business. That's unfortunately the most common scenario I see. The worst scenario I see, Arlen, is that a company has been around, maybe have a few MBAs that can do the pitch deck, and it's not a great idea, or it's a very basic concept, and they upsell it, the capabilities, and you have to question the integrity of those companies, and they get big money. I've seen companies like that get 25, 50, 100 million, and I know right off the top it's not necessarily a good tool. It's just they have a very fancy PowerPoint deck. They're able to convince some people who are not well versed in AI, but have access to venture capital funding, and they get big money. So it's like this dichotomous thing that I see. A lot of companies, small companies, don't make it, and then a few that make it, oftentimes don't have enough substance, or worse, have actually really questionable integrity about what they're selling.
Yeah, those are good insights. And also, this equity question always comes up, and unless there's a significant financing event, nobody's going to get anything. So this in these days, IPOs are sort of a who cares, because there's so many private unicorns and more companies are staying private. Secondly, and doesn't have really I mean, there is a secondary market, but it's not really that robust. The other point is that more and more startups are actually acquiring other startups. So they're private companies acquiring other private companies, and that further complicates the issue. So this notion that you're going to build something and have GE Healthcare or whomever acquire your company for $100 million is possible, but it's becoming less and less common. So I think you have to understand the exit strategy and how is this going to work. If anybody's going to get anything, I don't care how much equity you have, it's not worth a damn if it does, you can't exercise the options or cash in the stock. So that's another issue.
Yeah, I was just going to add, if I could, Arlen, just
go ahead.
Anthony, I think it's such a fantastic point that I think we've made the mistake across the board in healthcare, and you've seen huge companies like Google fall into the trap and thinking, hey, we'll build a great piece of tech and healthcare will just adopt it because we know how to build tech, right? And that's just how many billions of dollars have been wasted with that methodology, right? And it just doesn't work in healthcare, right? Where you can build the best product in certain industries and people will just use it because it's the best product, but there's so many other complexities and nuances that you have to keep in mind with healthcare that I think have been lost. And to your point, when you have a group building a product that's intended for patients and to be used by clinicians, but without any input of either of those stakeholders, it's going to be really hard to see widespread adoption and to scale. And so that's another thing we've really focused on I kind of say not to build a shiny object and hope people come. We have clinicians in-house. We have well-versed data scientists who also understand enough about healthcare. That's kind of how we hire to make sure that they understand this world that they're building for, as well as on the engineering side. But I think that's a core piece of what I mentioned too for the Innovation Partnership Program. That's what we really want to be, boots on the ground, understanding what are the actual needs, what are the problems, how do we build something that doesn't necessarily need to be the most groundbreaking technology, but if the providers will use it and it helps them in a way, that's much more important. And how do we go past this kind of pilotitis that we have in healthcare right now in terms of getting beyond just small scale deployments of AI to really see that ROI that most people dream of and think will be a reality?
So to follow up,
I was just going to say, Arlen, a big part of the disconnect is, let's talk about the clinicians that are in these companies or recruited by the big titans. The typical clinician I see are either retiring or retired clinicians who understand very little about AI, or they're a physician executive that may have time to help a startup, but they're out of practice for 20 years. They're administrators. And the third kind are probably the kind that creates the most damage, like you were saying, Arlen, is the big companies go after schools like Stanford because it's right down the street, and they get graduates who've never even stepped in a hospital as an attending physician, or even did a lot of them have not even done a residency. They have an MD after their name, and so it's kind of like getting a fresh West Point graduate to go fight a war. It's the lack of experience that these big companies hire is mind-boggling, that they don't hire, never mind practicing clinicians, but just clinicians who are seasoned. And the new grads, as you know, hear about a few things in classes, but they really don't understand the nuances of system science of healthcare.
The recurrent question we get from docs in the trenches is, how do I get in the game? So, Eric, I'm not talking about some senior executive. I'm talking about a practicing clinician who is increasingly improving their knowledge and skills in artificial intelligence, is probably using it in their clinical practice, either knowingly or unknowingly. And they want to get involved in product development and sort of do stuff other than just see patients. They want to make stuff better. So how do they get involved? What do they do? And maybe you can comment on, for example, you're launching some sort of initiative to get doctors to inform your product development early on so that we don't wind up with EMR shock again. Like, who the hell were the people who created this damn thing? We can't use it. It's awful. It doesn't help, blah, blah, blah. You know the story. So how should doctors, if they want to get involved, other than, to Ang's point, get an MBA? That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, I was just going to address that. I don't know, and listen, I'm the one, I did it, so I can speak.
So did I. So do a lot of people on this call.
Yeah, the way that things are evolving, I don't know if get an MBA is the answer, right? So I think there's so much that my answer to your question, Arlen, is get educated on the AI piece, right? And you do not need a degree for that. There is such a wealth of resources. I know Anthony puts out incredible amounts, so I'll do, we can do an ad for some of the courses that you all do and the certification that you provide. But I mean, there's courses through deeplearning.ai, there's Coursera courses through Stanford. I mean, it's just about dipping your toe in and getting that foundation, and then your world kind of opens up to what are the possibilities. And then you can think about, how do I specialize? Are you going to go down the computer vision lane, and are you really passionate there? Are you going to become an expert in deep learning applications and kind of learn everything there is to know about transformers and LLM architecture and all of those things? But you have to start somewhere. And again, yeah, I think also it's a tough question to answer because the world in AI is evolving so fast, and within healthcare, I would dabble a little bit in understanding Python, understanding pieces of implementation science more broadly. And then the next kind of stage to that is, to Anthony's point, engaging and seeing what startups are out there that need a clinician perspective now that you understand the AI piece. But I would caution, don't go just jump into any company that's saying like, hey, I just need to throw an MD on my PowerPoint slides, right? Because there's a ton of options. Now, I think if you have that back foundation in AI and enough knowledge, you can validate what is that company building, both from a clinical and from a technical perspective. And then you make a decision, am I going to pour my limited time into this company and make it successful? So I would start by just education. And I know that the docs and any type of clinician on this call have spent so much time in education, so it shouldn't be anything new. You should be kind of used to it at this point. But I think that's what it's about, getting your feet wet in the foundation you'll need.
So those are useful tips, but the fact remains, now you got to figure out how to get a job. So you got all this, you're developing your knowledge, skills, competencies, all that stuff. But, and this gets down to, how do you inform the thinking of the product team so they don't make a shiny new object, and build it and they'll come. And we constantly see this issue of new product development teams trying to get access to hospitals and enterprises to pilot their system. And yes, the vast majority of doctors now in the United States, and I want to get to the international take on this in a minute, work for the man. So you can't really get to them without getting to the decision makers at the enterprise level. But There's about 1.1 million practicing clinicians in the United States, which means there are 300,000 doctors who don't work for the man. They work for themselves. They work in group practice. They work in private practice. And although everybody is doom and glooming private practice, there's still a lot of folks out there doing it. So how do you access, let's just put the enterprise thing, the B2B chore aside. What are you doing to engage individuals on this call who may be in private practice, who want, or some other practice thing other than working for somebody, who want to get in the game?
Yeah, so that's I will say that's a dream scenario for me, getting an engaged clinician who has a small to medium sized clinic, right? Because again, we go in with the approach of providing the education and laying the infrastructure for the end tool to actually be successful. You cannot skip that stage and just expect to turn the switch on, plug in an AI tool, and it's just going to show the value that you wanted, right? So if we're that sales network that that I mentioned, they're really focused. And again, these are people with experience in healthcare that we train deeply on understanding AI implementation and the different kind of research components that we're going to integrate. But that's a dream scenario because we don't have to cut through all the bureaucracy. We don't have to go through a 6-month legal and compliance review. But that becomes our responsibility and the education of that clinician to make sure that we're deploying in a responsible way, that the tools have been validated, are continuously monitored, that they're providing the value and the outcomes that we want.
Yeah. So you're launching an initiative to get people to actually pilot your project and give you feedback. So maybe you can put your email address in the chat, and if someone on this call wants to do that, they can just get in touch with you. And incidentally, you're paying them to do it. So I don't want to get into an infomercial, but if someone is interested in doing this, they can contact you to learn more, correct?
No, absolutely. And we want that perspective. We need real world evidence to validate what we're building. And
okay. So I want to open this up to questions from the audience. And while you're thinking, or does someone have a question or a comment or an insight or share some experience they want to ask? I mean, we have folks from all over the world on this call. If you
Arlen,
do,
Arlen,
yes.
Can I ask a question on all of our behalfs?
Sure.
I know the difference, but I think maybe not everyone appreciates the difference between Eric's venture studio and an accelerator.
Right. So Eric, what's the difference between an accelerator and a venture studio?
So an accelerator is typically you go in, you can have your idea, you're there for a set amount of time. They support kind of the ideation and maybe connecting you and networking within their network. But then you kind of go off into the world and you scale from that point. We are, again, trying to provide the approach where we do that function, but we deploy the capital, give you a team to build the solution, give you a team to sell and commercialize the solution, somebody to lean on for all of those functions. And it's not a set defined period that you're in ThinkHat and then it's like, hey, go off and do it on your own.
Yeah, I look at this that an accelerator is like obstetrics and a venture studio is like adolescent medicine. Like all they do is help you give birth to your company and maybe fund a little. Not all. I mean, there's some fairly significant accelerators, but in terms of the full product and the whole product solution of adding all this other stuff, particularly go to market, finding money, scaling the company, and staffing the company, because a lot of these venture studios, you're not going to wind up being the CEO of this company. They're going to provide provide the talent to be the CEO, the COO, the CFO, all these administrative positions and leadership positions, because they've been there, done that. And this is really all about experience and connections. And these folks have been in pharma and AI and big tech and all that. So that's another really pretty significant. The team becomes a lot more robust. And my view of accelerators is they're valuable, but basically they help you and then they launch you, and hopefully you get out of living in their basement.
I think it's
So I want to.
I think
Go ahead,
venture
Ian.
studio is more nurturing and it's more like a parent. I was putting down. And
Well,
because it's a long-term commitment, right? Despite difficulties. And I love the concept because there are some clinicians here that they actually may have the next, big idea, but they don't have the entire, studio is an appropriate term, a portfolio of the services. But the idea is really, really good.
so I want to ask people in the audience from an international perspective, what are there venture studios, for example, in South Africa? Glenn? Glenn, are you with us?
Putting Glenn on the spot. Anthony,
Yeah, I'm putting that, and maybe Peter, you can chime in on do venture studios exist in the UK?
It's a very good question. I've just been doing a little bit of Googling myself because I'm not sure I'm close enough to it. It's provoked a sort of thing in my own head about what is going on in the UK from that side of things. So I can't answer that directly. I'm afraid right at this moment because I don't know. I'd be misleading people if I started waffling on.
Right. Eric, so suppose someone wants to start a venture studio, like Peter. He wants to start a venture studio in London or wherever, and he doesn't really know a whole lot about venture studios at this point, but it's an intriguing idea, and he's going to do, and he's going to talk to his friend. So, what advice would you give to someone who is thinking about either being a limited partner in a venture studio or actually running one and being the general partner? And maybe you can explain the difference between a general partner and a limited partner.
Yeah. Before you started, let me introduce you to our founder and see how many sleepless nights he's had. So it's not an easy thing to launch, but requires a lot of thought. And again, like I said, there are nuances to each venture studio. They're all kind of structured a different way. So,
well, let me just interrupt you before you pass that point. So give people a sense of who Ravi is and how he wound up doing this. Ravi is the CEO of ThinkHAT.
Yeah, so Ravi's our CEO and founder. He is a serial entrepreneur since, from way back when. He actually got his PhD in AI and computer science. At this point, it was expert systems back in 1986 out of one of the top schools in India, IIT Madras. So he had his first successful exit kind of late or early 2000s. And he's kind of one of those entrepreneurs that keeps going all in after an exit, can't stay still, and started his next company right after that, which had an acquisition by PwC about 3 years ago. And unfortunately, due to kind of a lot of personal struggles within his family with mental health, he fell into this place of falling in love with science, being introduced to a lab, the Yamanaka lab at UCSF, where he met the PI. And it kind of just opened up this whole new world to him where he decided, hey, this is how I want to leave my legacy. This is what I want to pursue as my next big step in my career. And so he's really gone all in with us and has a ton of experience in terms of scaling companies, in terms of AI, software, service companies, product companies on both sides of the fence. And so this is kind of putting all of those adventures and experiences together and building something that can sustain the growth of multiple ventures.
And he has personally funded this.
Yeah. So we've been around for about 2.5 years. He's personally funded and stood up the entirety of the team, with various pieces coming from other ventures that he's scaled and exited. And now we're actually in the stage of raising two funds, one to scale the existing portfolio that I've alluded to, and then one as a growth fund that will support the launch and scaling of future portfolios.
If I'm a doctor, if I'm interested, I am a doctor. If I'm interested in being a limited partner in this or a fund like it, what do I need to know? What is it? I mean, what's a limited partner? Why would I do that? And all that stuff.
Yeah. So I will say this: again, limited partners will typically make an investment. They'll have involvement. They'll show up to the board meetings, but maybe not on a day-to-day. What we're actually looking for is more GPs, like you mentioned, general partners who go in. I won't freak everybody out with the amount. We can talk about that later, but go in for a certain amount. You'll have a general partnership, and ThinkHAT has a top holding company where the general partners kind of sit, and then the venture studio and all the employees are a separate entity and company. But if you were to invest there, we would have the expectation that you're really involved, more closely on a day-to-day. You're in the weeds with us, figuring out, which companies to pursue. Maybe one company that we thought was a fantastic idea, but we need to close shop. And again, the strength of the venture studio model is that a failure is never a full-blown failure in the traditional sense if you're a standalone startup. We've seen that, with certain companies that maybe didn't scale the way we wanted, we can use IP and parts of the tech stack that we built for that to help scale and plug into other portfolio companies. The limited partnership is, mostly, kind of a financial investment. We're actually in our venture studio model looking for not just the money and the capital, but the expertise of that individual to build companies within healthcare, within AI, life sciences as well, and to help us scale many aspects of the portfolio.
So Anthony has a bunch of questions. So what's the life expectancy or survival rate of a company that comes out of an accelerator versus a venture studio? And I just
Arlen, that's a good question too. But I was more, if Eric happens to know, I'm talking about the accelerators and the venture studios themselves. But also the company would be a good question also.
Oh, you're referring to the survival rate of the venture studio.
Yeah.
Not let alone the companies that they produce. Yeah, that's a good question.
They're both good questions. Yeah.
Right. So Eric.
So you're okay. We're taking the higher level, the venture studio. There are, the most famous venture studio is Flagship Pioneering. I'm assuming that's the one that most people have heard of, and that's actually what Moderna spun out of. And so you only need one Moderna. We're all one Moderna away from having a successful venture studio. I don't know the exact failure rate. I do know that we quote some statistics that around it improves your success rate as an overall portfolio by around 35 to 40% by spinning out of a venture studio. In terms of studios specifically in the AI and healthcare space, I think all the ones that were healthcare venture studios are kind of pivoting to that lane. So probably the biggest one there is Redesign Health. Their model, though, is much less intensive on the full stack and development side. They're more providing the capital, serving in consulting roles to scale the company, but they require the management team and the core technical resources to come from the startup itself rather than relying on the venture studio. So it's just a different kind of take. But there are statistics that show higher rates of success of the portfolio companies. I don't know off the top of my head the overall venture studio success rates.
I'm just going to say for doctors, and not to knock on surgeons, Arlen, but neurosurgeons might be the worst in terms of wanting their autonomy and not willing to work with or partner with a venture studio or an accelerator. They rather fail on their own, literally, and put hundreds of, if not millions of dollars in, than to have a much higher chance of success with a team. At least that's what I've seen both locally and globally.
So one question that commonly comes up is, if you're a doctor and you want to do this, how do you get paid? Um, and I'll just chime in, and I'm open, obviously encouraging others. There's several models for. First of all, you should look at compensation, not just cash. Secondly, because that involves equity and stock and all that other stuff, plus cash. And basically, the models, the compensation models are per hour, retainer, project based, or some combination of all of the above, cash and equity and that kind of stuff. So the answer to the question is, it really depends on a lot of factors, and it's different in my experience, every time you have this conversation. But the final word is, you need to clarify the expectation when you get involved in this in the conversation. And basically, it's, what do you expect me to do? Why do you think that I can? What is your problem that you think I can help you solve? What are the deliverables and timelines you expect me to do this? In other words, and then how are you going to compensate me to do this? So it's a cost benefit, but you have to flush all this stuff out. So Anthony, you've been in this game for a while, and certainly Eric. So what's your response?
Eric, you want to go first?
Yeah.
Anybody else in the crowd that's doing this? I mean, share your wisdom.
Yeah, I obviously am a huge advocate of moving into this space right now, but I think for the clinicians, that the value you bring from a clinical perspective is extremely strong. But I think also, again, taking into account the bigger picture of what you're stepping into. So make sure that you understand the technical components as well, at least foundationally, because otherwise it's going to be hard even to put your clinical perspective in a very meaningful way. And I'm not saying everybody needs to go out and get a PhD or a master's degree in AI, but at least that foundational knowledge. In terms of valuing your time, I mean, it's person to person. It depends on, how many hours are they going to be asking you for? And I'm negotiating against myself here a little bit, but like, stand up for yourself, right? And say, if I'm going to give you this many hours, this is how I value it. And don't allow the negotiation to just be pushed by the other side, and make sure, I think what you're bringing is extremely valuable, and every startup needs that perspective. And most of them, as Anthony said, are missing it at this point. So give it a shot, start playing with it, and also as I've said before, take your time in evaluating the startup you're going to step into, right? There's limited hours in a day, and I think you can bring a lot of value in various positions.
Yeah. Abhilash, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, but you posted that question. You have something you want to add or share your experience?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. This has been fascinating. A couple of things. I want to echo on something that Dr. Chang brought up about neurosurgeons. I'm a neurosurgeon, so I can be very I can be very open about yes. In a hospital system, I'm just going to call it as it is. We're like the great whites. Like, nobody messes with us. Nobody tells us what to do. We kind of run the show in a hospital. And that sometimes comes at the detriment of not knowing how to innovate because we just talk to each other. And it's very hard to get buy-in from other neurosurgeons for new ideas. And another point made earlier with experience, it just feels like these positions are given to much older clinicians that have no concept of how to scale a company, let alone build processes that improve care. So I'm kind of mid-career thinking about making a switch from my private practice. But ultimately, people do want a quality of life, especially the younger people I'm talking to who are coming into the field. But also, how much are they going to get paid is a question I get asked all the time. And I go off of what I charge lawyers for expert witness work. It's kind of the same thing, the same concept. I'm going off of that. So yeah, I'm happy to connect with anyone here. I'll put my email in the chat, and we can continue the conversation.
Thanks for that. Yeah, Timothy, you want to ask or make your statement or chime in? Tim Gibbons?
Sorry, thanks, Arlen. Happy to make a comment. I'm just back from Australia, and certainly the Australians are on full red alert not to trust anything out of the US. And I think we're going to see that out of Europe. I think we saw it a couple of weeks ago when J.D. Vance failed to help establish any kind of guidelines out of the US on AI, and we're under full red flag. And I think every organization is going to have to really reestablish its trust statements and its honesty statements and its integrity statements, because that's really what's up for review.
Yeah, this is another conversation in who is responsible for regulating AI, and we could get fairly deep in the weeds in this, but a recent headline is sort of probably one of the biggest issues confronting boards of directors of hospitals and executive teams have to do with confidentiality, security, and the data. And it's kind of, I mean, as of this moment, to your point, people are struggling at a governmental level to come up with mutually acceptable guidelines. So unfortunately or unfortunately, depends on where you sit, it's falling on industry to regulate what they're doing. But we all have such distrust of industry that we're really not sure where that's going to wind up.
Yeah, I was just, to that point. We've seen that many, if not most, health systems we're engaging with, right, have not fully fleshed out their governance structure for AI. So we've taken it upon ourselves, right, that we think about that daily, we deploy with that process in mind, but we're also looking externally to partner with organizations to make sure that that process is very robust before we deploy one of our solutions. And then, there's organizations like the Coalition for Healthcare AI, CHI, that we've partnered with, and they've developed their AI model cards for the buyer side, the health systems, to evaluate solutions coming in. There's organization Valid AI that we work closely with that helps with the actual deployment. So I encourage folks on that side of the fence to really look to these organizations for leadership, and definitely don't always trust the startup to give you all the information you need. There's partner organizations who are thinking about this and can help health systems who are maybe don't have a very fleshed out strategy in terms of this.
We're running out of time, but I want to get another comment from Ang. Gary, could you ask us your question?
Yeah, so currently, if you're working for a big healthcare group, how do you deal with conflict of interest? Because there are startups coming for collaboration. Right now, I'm doing a clinical advisor for scaling of AI solution. So I have a lot of approaches on AI. How do you deal with conflict of interest? And
just out of curiosity, where are you coming from?
I'm from Singapore. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. So this is, so anybody want to chime in? Anthony, my brief 2 cents is this is a common issue. Depending on where you sit, for example, in a university where you have certain constraints as far as, I've run into this numerous times, but I think it's happening more and more in community-based hospitals, and it's happening to everybody. So the real issue has to do with, protecting IP. It has to do with who owns what. It has to do with, well, if you have a stake in a company and you work in the healthcare situation, and you're trying to onboard, at least introduce the solution, you inevitably wind up to this conflict of interest thing. So my suggestion to you is, again, and I'm sorry, but it depends. It depends on the country you're in. It depends on your practice situation. It depends on the rules and regs of the practice plan. It depends on all kinds of things. And again, read the contract, read the employment contract, and understand the rules and regulations of onboarding these companies, particularly when you have a financial interest in them. And I've run into this repeatedly. I mean, I started a company. I wanted it. I thought it was doing some good, but when I approached my employer, which at the time was a university, they said, well, this could be the greatest thing since sliced bread, but since you own part of it, we can't do it because of conflict of interest. This also comes into play when you're proposing a pilot project in an institutional review board, because if you're proposing something to an IRB, the NIH, as long as it's still around, requires you to divulge these conflicts of interest. So there are all kinds of issues that come up, and if you're not educated or aware of what they are, talk to somebody who is, otherwise you're just spinning your wheels.
Yeah, can I just add, there are partnerships that are showing success on a global basis, especially in oncology. Sloan Memorial Kettering is doing a partnership with the Royal North Shore in Sydney. And again, it's all based around data. So I think you really have to look at your clinical specialties, oncology, cardiology, any of the research protocols are related to pharmacology. All of those are big international opportunities to do collaborative, specifically focused collaborative AI engagements. And I think international partnerships still have a big opportunity, especially because American institutions have those large databases that the international community doesn't have. So I think AI applications take on great depth when there is collaboration between strategic partners who are practicing in top 10 or specific disease-specific areas such as oncology, cardiology, and other clinical subspecialties.
That's a good point. I put a link in the chat to something called MANASA, which is Middle East, North Africa, South Asia, and basically this group is trying to enroll folks outside of the United States into clinical trials. So to your point, there are all kinds of clinical trials, and a lot of them are oncology. So there are all sorts of ways to get around this and to sort of figure it out and do the end run. But that's a good point. So we only have a couple more minutes. Anybody have another question or comment?
I'll just throw in a comment, Arlen.
Yeah.
It's absolutely near perfect time for any clinician that is looking for a different dimension or a career extender to get into AI. It really cannot be any easier and any more widespread right now compared to 10 or 15 years ago. And when I was in school, it's much easier now. There's a wealth of learning opportunities that you can have. It is absolutely the best time. So we're way past the early adopter stage, and it's not too late at all to get involved. And you don't have to know how to program. I know Eric and I may disagree with that a little bit, but learn about AI before you kind of get yourself into programming, because I think that the dividend is much higher just learning about AI in general.
Well, this has been great. I hope everybody has good insights and action items and get on the stick doing this stuff. Eric, thanks a lot for informing us. If you have questions or comments or you want to engage with Eric, he put up his email, and Anthony and all the rest of the gang. So thanks very much, and we'll see you next month. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.